Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video I have my Game Week 5 preview where I'll be discussing the key players that you should be looking to buy and sell in your FPL teams, as well as some overall strategy based questions as well. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So two players that I'm very interested in myself this week, and a lot of you will be as well, is Jamie Vardy and Calvert-Lewin. And maybe for you guys, it will be more the interest in Jamie Vardy, and maybe for me, it might be slightly more Calvert-Lewin, because Calvert-Lewin has been a bit of a FPL troll in the past. He's very much struggled to stay fit when a lot of people have trusted him, brought him in. He obviously picks up the injury. So I think maybe Jamie Vardy will be slightly more popular amongst most managers. But listen, I think both of them are fantastic. Also, we do have now news that Wissa is out for about 2 months, which is a massive blow to Brentford. Lots of people went for Wissa. And also, Muniz started last night in the Cup in what was pretty much an entirely second string side for Fulham. So Muniz now, for me, has to be sold, or at least benched, and I think Wissa has to be sold as well. So lots of people will be looking to load up on Jamie Vardy and Calvert-Lewin, and that's also without any news. I don't, as of me recording, have an update on João Pedro. So I think cheap forwards will be very popular this week, and I'm actually going to discuss Nketiah in the next section, because I think he'll also be very popular too. But Jamie Vardy and Calvert-Lewin have a lot of exactly what you want from FPL assets. What do you want from a forward? You want them to get good minutes. Great. They've had 82 minutes and 81 minutes this season. What else do you want? You want them to be involved in a large share and a large quantity of their team's goals. Both of these players do that. They'll be involved in a high percentage of what their team do. You want them to be on penalties, preferably. Both players are on penalties. And you want them to start pretty much every game. And these two will do that. On top of all of that stuff being talismanic, having good minutes, starting most games, they both also have really good fixtures from Game Week 5 and beyond. So if you've already wildcarded or you're looking to save the wildcard, longer term, if you look across the next 5 or 6 weeks, they both have really brilliant fixtures. Now, I would say that despite the FDR colour scheme being 4 green fixtures for both, I do prefer Calvert-Lewin's fixtures. So for Vardy, he's got Everton, Arsenal, Bournemouth, Southampton and Forest. Everton is a great fixture this week. In fact, obviously, they play against each other this week. And you can let me know down below, what is your prediction for the Everton-Leicester game? I think there will be goals in this, although I said I thought there'd be goals in the Spurs-Arsenal game, and there wasn't. So let's see how that goes. But I think there'll be goals in that. So they play against each other this week. But Jamie, it's not on first name basis. Jamie Vardy has Arsenal in Game Week 6, which is obviously about as difficult as it can get. Then I don't think Bournemouth are a team that will roll over. Obviously, they've conceded goals thus far this season, but I don't think they're a bad defence. Southampton is a brilliant fixture. And then he's got Forest at home. And we've just seen that Forest, across the whole season and across last season, are actually a pretty decent defence. So I don't think they're bad fixtures. Like, as I said, I would still look at those and think Vardy can score. And Vardy is the sort of big game player. We've seen that across his entire Premier League career. And obviously he's getting older now, and he's not the same striker, but he does still know how to score in those big games. So it wouldn't bother me too much. But I think you've got 3 relatively tricky fixtures there against Arsenal, Bournemouth and Forest, especially the Arsenal and Forest games. Whereas for Calvert-Lewin, he's got Leicester, Crystal Palace, Newcastle, Ipswich and Fulham. Based on what we've seen thus far, I don't see any of those 5 as being good defences or particularly tough fixtures. Maybe Palace might be the toughest fixture, but they need to start improving quickly defensively. They even conceded to QPR last night. Like, they're not defending overly well. We know that Leicester and Ipswich aren't great. Not Newcastle just concede goals for fun as well, largely. And then Fulham, I don't think are a particularly good defence either, although they are improving with Anderson in the back line. So yeah, I think overall, despite them both having okay fixtures, I prefer Calvert-Lewin's. In terms of the underlying data so far, it's relatively similar for the two of them. So we'll focus in on those sort of expected goals and expected assist statistics. 0.39 expected goals per 90 for Vardy, 0.32 for Calvert-Lewin. So if they each play 90 minutes on a game, which they're not quite, but let's say they both play 90 minutes, you're expecting a goal every 3 games roughly. Slightly more often for Vardy, slightly less often for Calvert-Lewin. So if you're bringing these players in for the next for the next 6 games, I should say, you'd expect them to get, based on the data, roughly 2 goals based on how they've performed thus far. So obviously they've had different fixtures over the opening set, and I don't think either Leicester or Everton have had particularly good fixtures. So you might expect those statistics to improve now that Everton and Leicester's fixtures are starting to turn for the better as well. Calvert-Lewin is slightly more creative thus far, and I think that is seen. If you watch the games, Calvert-Lewin's link-up play is absolutely brilliant. Jamie Vardy has always been a proper poacher, and that is not an insult to him. Haaland's the same. Haaland's expected assists are always terrible because he's not getting involved. He just sits there in the box and waits to score goals, whereas Calvert-Lewin does a lot more for the team in terms of his hold-up play and his link-up play. In terms of big chance involvement, Calvert-Lewin is involved in just over 1 big chance per 90, Jamie Vardy just under. So I don't think, based on, as well, it being a very small sample size of 4 games, there's much to separate them in terms of data. Fixtures, I would slightly lean Calvert-Lewin. And I've just been extremely impressed with Calvert-Lewin thus far. Like, when I watched the Everton games, and I watched the entire Everton versus Villa game, and I watched the extended highlights of the Bournemouth game, Calvert-Lewin, along with Dwight McNeil, who have been linking up very well, and also Harrison, I've actually been very impressed with Everton in terms of going forward. It's just defensively, they've been a bit of a mess, which then leans back to saying Jamie Vardy could be very, very good this week. So, yeah, for me, there's not a lot to separate the two of them. I also think the key thing is, when are you looking to wildcard? Because I think if you're looking to wildcard in the future, Game Week 12, Game Week 14, then they've both got good long-term fixtures. It doesn't probably matter. And if you've already wildcarded, then again, you need to think longer term. It's not a huge issue. But if you're looking to wildcard in Game Week 7, which is what I'm probably currently looking at, you then say, well, Jamie Vardy's got Everton and Arsenal. Calvert-Lewin's got Leicester and Palace. I'd probably prefer Calvert-Lewin just because of that Arsenal game. Whereas if you're wildcarding in Game Week 8, it then becomes Everton, Arsenal, Bournemouth, Leicester, Palace, Newcastle. It gets a little bit closer. So it really does depend on your wildcard window. Lots of people asking if you're going to take a 1-week punt on Vardy or Calvert-Lewin, who would you go for? Because you're wildcarding in Game Week 6. I'm not sure that 1-week punts exist anymore. Unless you're saying you've got like a Maniz or Wissa there and you need to remove them this week, but you also want a wildcard in 6, then I guess a 1-week punt sort of does make sense. But I think the value of a 1-week punt is significantly diminished now that you can carry transfers through the wildcard, which we'll discuss a bit later. So I probably wouldn't be taking 1-week punts anymore. But if you were to, maybe back the home fixture in Jamie Vardy, potentially, as well as just, obviously, Everton have not been good defensively thus far. They've been the worst defence in the league, I would say. So, yeah, I think it's very close. So, I would just about overall, if I'm just assessing them as assets at the moment, just about lean Calvert-Lewin. The only final thing I did want to say is Calvert-Lewin did miss out midweek on Tuesday due to illness, apparently. However, most people are seeming to suggest that Sean Dyche said that the players that weren't included in the squad, such as Calvert-Lewin, were ill because he wanted an excuse for why he didn't even carry them on the squad and they eventually lost. So maybe he isn't actually ill. Maybe he'll be absolutely fine. But that's obviously a slight worry. If he is genuinely ill, he might not be able to engage in full team training this week. But we'll find that out before the deadline. Most people seem to think that's just an excuse for not carrying your best goal scorer, at least on the bench in case you need him. So yeah, let me know. Anyone interested in Vardy or Calvert-Lewin? For me, if I'm going to go for one of them, just due to when I'm looking to wildcard, I think it's most likely to be Calvert-Lewin. So I don't think we can have a discussion around the cheap forwards in FPL at the moment to replace the likes of Maniz and Wissa without having a bit of a chat about Eddie Nketiah, who is obviously now transferred to Crystal Palace, got 90 minutes in Game Week 4, and also scored a goal last night against QPR as well in the Cup. So listen, I really like Nketiah. I think he's been unnecessarily criticised in the past, mainly by Arsenal fans, but also by general media for his finishing. I actually think Nketiah is a very good natural finisher. I think his issue is when he's got too much time to think about it. You find this sometimes with forwards where they get in their own head. Maybe it's more of a mental thing, but the more time they have to think about something, the less they perform. I think Nketiah, if you give him that quick snapshot opportunity where he just has to quickly take a shot, he often does very well. That was similar to the goal that he scored against QPR. Despite it being bad goalkeeping, it's that natural finish where you just take a shot and you don't have to think about where do I want to place it and all of that stuff. So I actually think Nketiah is naturally a good finisher. I just think he needs to get a good run of minutes because finishing is very form-based. And I feel like you very rarely get someone that comes back from injury and just starts firing goals. It does happen, but usually it's when a player has got a good run of minutes. And I think that's why someone like Ten Hag is trying to play Rashford into form, because the way that you get a player to start scoring goals isn't by not playing them. So anyway, I basically think Nketiah is a very, very good forward. I know he's more of a striker. He won't be quite playing as a striker, I don't think, for Crystal Palace. It's very fluid, the way that they'll play, but it will be Mateta, Eze, and Nketiah as their attacking trio. There will be points where he's playing as a 9 with Mateta. Maybe Mateta will drop a bit little deeper. Maybe Nketiah will pull out to the right at points. Maybe he'll pull out to the left. I think it'll be quite fluid, but he's not an out-and-out 9, I wouldn't say, at Palace. But we might start to see that a little bit more. In terms of his minutes going forward, well, he's got 90 minutes in the first game for Crystal Palace, and then Glasner came out in a press conference and essentially said, we have not paid all of this money for Nketiah to sit on the bench. Now, he said that before Game Week 4, and I was like, yeah, managers say this all the time. We paid all of this money for a player, they're not just going to sit on the bench. And they do sit on the bench for large spells, or at least they get lots of early subs. He comes in and plays 90 minutes straight away, and he looks really, really good. And I do wonder, is Glasner being truthful? Is he just not going to get much rotation at all? And he's going to be as important to this side as someone like an Eberechi Eze? Maybe. He got 65 minutes in the Cup, which I think is largely good because he is still building up his fitness. So he's come in, played 90 minutes in the league, 65 minutes in the Cup, scored a goal. And actually his underlying data in the opening game was really good. He had 6 shots in total and all of those were in the box. You can see here 0.31 non-penalty expected goals, 0.23 expected assists. None of them were big chances, but he definitely had the opportunity to score goals, which is what you want early on. In terms of fixtures moving forward, they're not great. And this is why I probably do slightly prefer someone like a Vardy or a Calvert-Lewin at the moment. Because out of the 3, I would say these are the toughest set of fixtures. United and Everton over the next 2, though, they're not particularly good defences at the moment. United are conceding chances, although I don't think as bad as some people are suggesting defensively. Liverpool made them look awful, but that is how good Liverpool can be. I think they're like a middling defence. If I had to say, I'd say like a mid-table 10th to 12th in terms of where I'd expect them to finish the season for expected goals conceded. But still, it's at home. It's an okay fixture. And then Everton, we've spoken about, are really poor defensively at the moment. So the next 2 are okay. But then they go into Liverpool, Forest and Spurs. Liverpool's not a good fixture. Liverpool are the best defence in the league at the moment. Arsenal fans don't hate me just based on the numbers. Forest, we've spoken about. Defensively for at least 12 to 14 months, they've been very good. And then Spurs actually get a lot of stick. Spurs' defensive data across the last year under Ange isn't as bad as people suggest. And they've started this season okay as well defensively. Like, they largely did limit Arsenal to just a set-piece goal. So I don't really like the fixtures from Game Week 7. But then that comes back to the point of, if you're looking to wildcard in 7... then you could go for a 2-week punt on an Eddie Nketiah. It really depends on like your outlook at the moment and your strategy in your wildcard window. And you really do need to start nailing down when you want a wildcard. Later in this video, might even be the next section, I'm going to look at Game Week 6 versus Game Week 7 wildcard. So I can help you out a little bit if you're trying to decide whether you should go for 6 or 7. But overall, I think he'll have strong data. I think the minutes will be good. I think the fixtures are okay, not terrible. I certainly don't mind a punt on Eddie Nketiah. The only thing is, I just think with the other options, not only do you have better fixtures, you also have penalties. And so I think for me at the moment, if I was to like order them in terms of how likely they are for me to come in, it's probably like Calvert-Lewin, Vardy, and Nketiah. But I think all 3 of them are fantastic. Let me know if you have any interest in the Crystal Palace man. So guys, I've received a lot of questions this week around 1-week punts in FPL. Specifically, a lot of people are obviously looking to wildcard in Game Week 6, and they're thinking from the traditional perspective of, I'm wildcarding next week. Who are some fun picks that I can bring in this week that I can then wildcard out the week after? And I understand it because that is the way that we think about FPL from in the past. But then lots of people now questioning, with the rule change that you can now carry transfers through the wildcard, i.e. the wildcard does not wipe out your transfers like it used to, are 1-week punts before a wildcard now kind of dead in FPL? So the question was, with the changes this season to transfers now rolling through a wildcard, what are your thoughts on using a transfer for a punt pick before a planned wildcard? Lots of managers have a Game Week 6 wildcard plan, but do you think the power of rolling a transfer in Game Week 5 outweighs taking a punt on an Ipswich attacker in Game Week 5, for example? Firstly, I'm not really interested in Ipswich attackers particularly, but maybe something like a Jamie Vardy could be a good example of, do you take a 1-week punt on Vardy, or do you just roll the transfer and rock with whoever you've got in the attacking setup? Maybe let's say you've got like an Isak, and I don't know if Isak's going to be available, but you've got an Isak. Is it worth going for a Jamie Vardy 1-week punt, or do you just roll? So just to recap, the reason 1-week punts were so popular in the past is because if you go into Game Week 5 with the 1 free transfer and you're looking to wildcard in Game Week 6, normally it makes sense to use that transfer because you would wildcard in 6, and because it wipes out your free transfers, you'd then go into Game Week 7 with obviously your wildcard team, but only the 1 free transfer. So you might as well use that transfer because you can't bank it, you can't keep it. And because obviously you're wildcarding, you don't need to think long-term, which facilitates this idea that you can have a 1-week fun, exciting pick that you wouldn't normally own, that maybe is a bit of a minutes risk, that has a really good fixture in that week, and then obviously you can just wildcard them out. So this is why 1-week punts have been so popular. But sadly now, given that that transfer that you're using isn't just a free-for-all transfer that you might as well use, you can keep that transfer and hold it essentially. So let's say you do have the one free transfer in game week 5 now, and you're wildcarding in game week 6. If you choose not to use that free transfer in game week 5 and roll it, you would then go into game week 6 with the 2 free transfers, right? But because the wildcard does not wipe out your free transfers, that means that if you then wildcard in game week 6 whilst you have 2 free transfers, you would go into game week 7 with 2 free transfers. It does, as far as I'm aware, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I've not yet wildcarded, you don't then roll another transfer during the wildcard. So you wouldn't go into game week 7 with 3, but you'd still have that one that you kept from game week 5. Hopefully that is clear. And what that means as a result is that you are using one of your very valuable transfers on a 1 week option. And for me, the value in a transfer and the value in a player increases the longer you own that player. If I'm bringing in a player that I think is really good for 4 to 6 weeks, that is a much more valuable use of my transfer than bringing in a player that I think is good for 1 week. In 1 week, anything can happen. And that is a good and a bad thing. But a player might have brilliant stats, let's say like 0.8 XG, and you think as a result, they're very likely to score in any given game. But what 0.8 XG means is over a long spell of time, they are averaging or expecting to get that in every game. In a single game, they might blank. So I just think it's such a risk now to use your one very valuable transfer that you can now keep through a wildcard on only a 1 week option. I would much rather, in most cases, try and keep that transfer and then use that post wildcard to bring in slightly longer term options. So I don't think they're now dead. Like if you are sat there and you're thinking, but I really want to take a 1 week punt. Or, for example, let's say, I don't know, you've got like your front line is Wissa and Moniz and you need to take out a forward, then I guess it is kind of a 1 week punt because you're wildcarding next week anyway. But I think if your team's in an okay position, I would feel much more comfortable rolling than taking a punt on something like an Ipswich attacker. So yeah, the rule change does now change how I would approach a 1 week punt. I don't know if I want to wildcard in 6 or 7, and I'm going to discuss that in a bit more detail in a second. But I think for most people, try to avoid 1 week punts, I think, unless it just increases your enjoyment of the game, and just realize that because you can now carry transfers through the wildcard, I think keeping them will be a little bit more useful. So let me know down below if that makes sense. Let me know if I've misspoken anywhere or I've not quite thoroughly explained it, because it's quite difficult to explain. And there's lots of conflicting opinions on like thinking you can like roll transfers through the wildcard. You can carry them through, but you won't gain an extra transfer in the week that you wildcard. I think that's the big common misconception, because your wildcard is your transfer for that week, right? So if you had 2 free transfers in game week 6 when you hit the wildcard button, that's the amount of transfers you'd then have in game week 7. You don't gain an extra transfer in the week that you wildcard. I think that's the only thing to clear up. But other than that, yeah, let me know what you think about 1 week punts now in FPL. So I think an important discussion at the moment is around a game week 6 versus game week 7 wildcard. And even if you've either already wildcarded or you're looking to do it much later, I still think this section will be useful as it's around kind of those big key fixture swings. So I think game week 6 and game week 7, it's largely the same, but also extremely different, especially for some of those key teams. And this is going to be such a cliche, annoying thing to say, but this is one of the most team-dependent decisions you can possibly make. So what I've got here is I've got the fixtures from game week 5 to game week 9 for a lot of the key teams. So I've got Arsenal, Liverpool, City, as well as a team that a lot of people are talking about bringing in assets from, which is Brentford, and then also Fulham, Palace, and Newcastle that a lot of us have invested in, and just discussing when you want to jump on and jump off. So if I've highlighted the fixture and the game week in green for that team, that is a week where you want to jump on those assets, i.e. game week 6 for Arsenal. And if it's in red, it means that is the week that I would be looking to jump off of those assets. So for example, for Fulham in game week 7. The reason that I've done this is I just think you need to go through your team, look at it player by player, but also overall, and just think generally overall, how many assets are there that I want to bring in game week 6 that I don't currently own? And how many assets that I want to sell in game week 6 that I do own? And then the same for game week 7. So let me go through it and just give some examples. In game week 6, you are going to want 3 Arsenal. And I think you are at a massive disadvantage if you don't. It's no disrespect to Leicester, but they've got Leicester and Southampton at home back to back. And you want to get on them at that good entry point, at the start of their good fixtures. So you will want, and you'll be at a disadvantage if you don't own, 3 Arsenal. So immediately, look at your team. If you've only got 1 or 0 Arsenal, I'd go for a game week 6 wildcard immediately. Because you're telling me then you're going to have to use at least 2 transfers. And that's just on sorting out the Arsenal issue in your team. So that's the first thing. I've got 2 Arsenal in my team. And so I think then it's a little bit more different, right? Because I will have a free transfer to use. In fact, I'm hoping I'll have 2 potentially, but probably not. Then I can use my 1 free transfer on bringing in an Arsenal asset. It's not ideal that that's my only transfer, but then I will still have a triple Arsenal. So I think if you've got 2 Arsenal already, you're not, for this team at least, forced into a 6 wildcard. I think if you've only got 0 or 1, then yeah, you probably are. Then the next issue, though, is actually Liverpool. So Liverpool have Bournemouth at home this week, and I know they weren't very good last week, but they're still the same team that we think are very impressive. Maybe if they struggle against Bournemouth, then we start to second guess a little bit. But they've got Bournemouth at home this week. Then they have Wolves away in game week 6. And actually, I think Wolves have been very poor defensively. I don't think they are a bad outfit at all. I think they might stay up. I think they'll be down there, but I'm not saying they're like an awful team. And this is away, but didn't they ship 6 goals to Chelsea at home themselves? So this is a really decent fixture for your Liverpool assets. And so for me, I'm looking at this and thinking, if I was to wildcard in 6, you probably are going to have to remove Salah. And people don't seem to like it when I say that. But if you want Saka, if you want a Havertz, if you want a Haaland, if you want someone that maybe you want a City attacker, if you do still want to hold on and keep Trent, you might have to sell a Salah, or you might have to sell a Trent. And you probably would end up selling a Jota or a Diaz. There's no one other than probably Liverpool fans that would have triple Liverpool on a game week 6 or game week 7 wildcard. So you have to accept that you're going to have to sell at least 1 or 2 of these Liverpool assets, probably. So if I'm going to move, and I've at the moment got Trent, Jota and Salah. If I want to move off of my triple Liverpool, well, then game week 6 is probably not the best week to do it. I'd probably want to do it, even though Crystal Palace, by the way, isn't a bad fixture, but it feels slightly better in game week 7. There could be just an element of the colour scheme here. Like if Crystal Palace was green and Wolves was grey, maybe, but I do just generally think Wolves are a weaker defence than Palace. So I feel slightly more comfortable selling more of my Liverpool assets in game week 7, but I guess you could jump off of them in 6. When it comes to City, if you're talking about Erling Haaland, it's never a bad point to bring him in. So that's why I've highlighted 6 and 7, because I look at this and think if it's Haaland you're talking about, then yeah, probably 6 or 7. Although game week 7 is really that ideal entry point against Fulham at home, where he's the best captaincy option. But if you're talking about someone like a Rico Lewis you want to bring in, or you want to bring in a Phil Foden if he starts to get minutes, then maybe Newcastle away isn't the best point. So I would tentatively lean towards 7 as being better than 6. But again, if you don't have Erling Haaland, maybe you want to rush it forward to game week 6 so that you can bring him in sooner rather than later. Brentford, I think, are great from 6 or 7. They've got West Ham at home and Wolves at home, but the fixtures extend beyond that. If you wanted to wait until 7, I don't feel like you're missing out terribly by missing that West Ham fixture, but equally game week 6 is a really nice entry point. So I think the key thing for me is around Arsenal, Liverpool, City, when you want to target them, how many you own. But also you've got Fulham, Palace, Newcastle, which is just 3 examples. Obviously Brighton are another team if you're heavily loaded up on them. But in game week 6, Fulham do have Forest. Now, I've spoken extensively about how good Forest's defensive data is, so I was hesitant to say that you would want to keep a Fulham asset for a fixture where I said I actually think Forest are a really good defence. But overall, that is a fixture where you wouldn't mind keeping your Fulham assets. So I don't think you need to rush your Fulham assets out in game week 6. If you had to start someone like a Smith Rowe or a Robinson in game week 6, it's not that bad. So I don't feel like you need to wildcard out Fulham assets then. But then after that, they've got Man City and Villa. So game week 7 is really the latest you'd want to be holding. Or sorry, game week 6, I should say, is the latest you'd want to be holding the likes of Smith Rowe and Robinson in your teams and starting 11. So game week 7 feels like a good exit point. Same with Palace. Man United and Everton in 5 and 6 feel like pretty good fixtures to hold. Like, I don't really desperately want or need to sell Eberechi Eze in game week 6 against Everton. But in game week 7, they then play against Liverpool. So for Palace, I feel like game week 7 is a good exit point. It then goes back the other way for someone like a Newcastle, though. If you've sat there and you've got in your team Lewis Hall, Gordon, and Isak, you could keep them this week for Fulham. Absolutely. I think they're good this week against Fulham, but then they go against Manchester City in game week 6. So for your Newcastle assets, you don't really want to keep them and start them in game week 6. You'd really want to remove them at that point. So I'm not going to go through every single team and do this, because you are capable of going through the fixtures, going through your team, and working out when you want to move in and out certain players. For me, I am leaning game week 7 at the moment because I've got 2 Arsenal. I can add a third. I've got 3 Liverpool. I kind of want them for game week 6. The only City player I want at the moment is Haaland, and I don't think I would captain Haaland in game week 6. So as much as he could punish me, I don't think he'll be a very popular captain. I think Saka will be. So his punishment, if he does do well once again, will be a little bit lower, and then I will own him definitely from game week 7. I have I have quite a few. I have one at the moment, if you ignore Manise, Fulham assets in Robinson, who I don't mind starting against Forest. I've got Eberechi Eze and Henderson, and whilst I don't really love Henderson, I don't mind keeping the two of them for game week 5 and 6. So yeah, I just think at the moment for my team, when I look at the team that I'd wildcard into in 6, I don't think it's much stronger than my actual team. Whereas in game week 7, I think it would massively improve. So I'll leave it there. But for me, 6 and 7 are largely the same in terms of you're targeting roughly the same fixture swings and targeting the same kind of team. It's about when you want to move out of your own team. And you don't want to do that too early. I suppose, very briefly, there is a discussion point around price changes. If game week 6 is when everyone's going to start bringing in the popular template players and you wait until game week 7, you might miss out on some of those initial price changes. Wildcard transfers, by the way, do not contribute towards price changes. So if everyone actually activates their wildcard and makes transfers on their wildcard, that doesn't affect price changes. Whereas if everyone makes the transfers and then activates the wildcard, then that will affect price changes. So it depends on which order people activate their wildcard. But I guess what I'm saying is you could miss out on some key price changes if you delay the wildcard 1 week and hold on to assets like Eze, who people might be selling, and don't manage to move on to assets like in Burmo, who people might be buying. Hopefully that's clear. For me, I'm like 65% game week 7, 35% game week 6. Let me know what your current plan is down below. So I thought it was worth a brief discussion around the best cheap midfielders at the moment in FPL. I think especially as we're starting to move towards a good wildcard window, but also I think people are just starting to wonder if they're sat there, especially with the likes of Rodgers in their team, and maybe even Smith Rowe, who, by the way, has been returning. Like, are they still the best cheap midfielders? Is it maybe worth moving them out and moving to someone else? So on this list here, I've got 14 midfielders priced 6 million and below. There are other ones that aren't on here. For example, Schmodix, who I had to take out because I only had space for 14, but also the underlying data was genuinely horrific. But he could even be a good option. There are other players that aren't involved in this list, but largely, if they're not on this list, unless I've just had an absolute stinker and forgotten about someone massive, then they're probably not a consideration for me. And regarding what the table shows, I've got their price, their minutes per game thus far this season, their non-penalty expected goals per 90, their expected assists per 90, their projected points from game week 5 to 8, and fixture difficulty game week 5 to 8, according to Fantasy Football Hub. And by the way, if you're still watching, firstly, please do consider liking and subscribing. But secondly, Fantasy Football Hub are still offering their 50% off. Some people seem to think it will last all season. I promise, as far as I've been told, it will not last all season. But they are still offering the 50% off. So if you want to get access to all of the stats that I use, especially in these Game Week preview videos, there will be a link down below to Fantasy Football Hub, and you can get that 50% off. It supports me, but also just a brilliant site all round. So the way that this table is ordered is by non-penalty expected goals per 90. So the person at the bottom, sadly, Dwight McNeil, has the lowest of everyone on this list, and the person at the top, which is Tavernier, has the highest. So, in terms of like which players on this list I would consider, I think Tavernier deserves a discussion because everyone, myself included, loves the idea of bringing in Semenyo, but Tavernier's data has been outrageous. 0.55 non-penalty expected goals per 90. Lots of this is game state. There was one chance where he missed it and then had a follow-up immediately after because he missed, and that would count as 2 really high XG chances. And that's why small sample sizes aren't great in FPL, because it might be that one massive clanger where you've shot from a yard out, it rebounds to you and you shoot again. It happened to Matoma last week. That could result in your data looking unbelievable, but what that actually suggests is that you've had a bit of a stinker and you've missed a big chance. So it's difficult, and that's why over a larger sample size, it starts to dilute those one-off events. But anyway, Tavernier's data is pretty strong. For me, I just think when I watch the games, I just think Semenyo looks more likely to score points, and that's backed by the projected points over at Hub. And so I think I would still prefer Semenyo, but Tavernier is an alternative. The data's pretty strong. His minutes have been very good. Semenyo's data is also very strong. It has dropped off a little bit because he just didn't have many chances in Game Week 4. But you can see, like, based on the colour scheme of he's very good in everything. He's got 90 minutes in every game thus far. Good goal threat, good assist threat, good for projected points. Fixture difficulty doesn't look good, but that's because they play Liverpool this week. And then I think they have one more tricky fixture. It might be against Arsenal in game week 8. So in 2 of the next 4, they've not got great fixtures, but then in 6 and 7, they have Southampton and Leicester. So I like Semenyo, but overall the fixtures maybe aren't as strong. Lots of people want me to discuss Onana, so he's in here. And to be honest, it's difficult to argue against him, given that he's got the second greatest XG on this list per 90, and he scored in the Champions League, an absolute banger last night. So yeah, do you know what? Maybe I am overlooking Onana, but I still think Rodgers is a better asset. And I know that's crazy, but I will die on this hill that he's just much closer to goal. His minutes are much better. And I think if you're looking in terms of who is more involved in every attack, Rodgers is that guy. So I still think that, again, look, 68 minutes he's getting per game. Rodgers is getting 90. I know Onana's per 90 XG is better, but he's not getting 90 minutes. And so would I rather a CDM that's getting 68 minutes per game or an attacking midfielder / second striker that's getting 90? I'd always go for the latter. But, and this is the big but, this is a big but, I don't think Rodgers is that great as an FPL asset. The more I watch him, he's passing the eye test. He's very involved. But there's two things. He's not always involved in that final action. He's involved in progressing the ball, popping the ball off to Ollie Watkins, who then passes to Jacob Ramsey. Like, he's involved in it. He's not as often involved in that final action. Although he did set up Watkins for 2 big chances, and he's had 2 big chances himself. But then when he does get the big chance, I don't think he's a good finisher from what I've seen. He snatches at the chances a lot. There was one left-footed shot he had from the edge of the box, and he snatched it, and it basically just rolled into the keeper's hands. So when I watch Rodgers, I don't get the impression that he is an elite finisher. And so if I don't think he's going to get that many final actions, the opportunity to score the goals, and when he does, I don't think he's a great finisher. No, I don't think Rodgers is close to being the best option on this list for me right now. But if you have him, he's got Wolves at home this week. He is getting such great minutes. I certainly think you could keep him a little bit longer. So it's one of those, I probably wouldn't sell Rodgers right now, but if I was on a wild card, would I include him? I'd be less sure. The minutes are still very tempting, though. Other players to discuss on this list, maybe let's go at the cheaper price. You've got Adama and Ahmad, 2 other players around that 5 million price point. Adama's data is much stronger than Rodgers, and his minutes have been pretty good, but the fixtures now start to turn for Fulham. So in terms of, yes, Adama was probably the better pick over Rodgers at the start of the season. That's fairly obvious, but I've lost those points. Now, as I say, you can't change the past. Look forward, and looking forward, I prefer the fixtures overall for for Rodgers than I do for Adama Traore. So for that reason, I probably wouldn't be looking at Adama. Smith Rowe is fine to keep, by the way, just on Fulham. Would I want to keep Smith Rowe now? I mean, 69 minutes per game. Data's okay. He's been returning. He got a 10-pointer and a 7-pointer, so it's difficult to argue against that. But I kind of feel a bit with Smith Rowe like Rodgers. They're very different players, but Smith Rowe's not as involved in the final action once again. He's involved in a lot of progressing the ball, linking up play. He's a brilliant footballer, but he's not had as many clear-cut opportunities to score and assist as I thought he might. So I probably wouldn't own Smith Rowe if I was to wildcard. Now, again, I don't think you need to go out there and sell him. So that's kind of how I feel on Smith Rowe. And then, like I said, Ahmad at the cheaper price. I just don't think his minutes are secure enough at all. So for me, he's a no. Other players to discuss, let's go to the Everton assets. So Harrison and McNeil. Everyone's interested in McNeil this week, and his data from an expected assist perspective is great. 0.57 expected assists per 90. He's created the most big chances in the Premier League this season. So he will get you lots of assists, but you can see here 0.03 XG. He's just not got enough goal threat for me. He's so creative, but he's literally got no goal threat. That's terrible XG data. That's bad. If that was a centre-back's data, I would be saying that's bad for a centre-back to have that per 90. So he just doesn't get the chances to score. So I actually think I weirdly maybe slightly prefer Harrison just in terms of his goal threat slightly higher, although his minutes aren't as secure. His assist threat is quite low and his goal threat isn't particularly good. So maybe, do you know what? I'm going to retract that statement. I don't prefer Harrison, but I also don't think that Dwight McNeil, based on this, he doesn't have enough about him in terms of scoring goals. And I know he has scored a goal, but it was from outside the box. So I feel like you need him to be getting into the box more and getting more goal-scoring opportunities. And I think in this Sean Dyche system, Dwight McNeil just isn't going to do that. So I don't mind either a punt on Harrison or McNeil, but probably not for me. There are other options on here. You could still look at Minte, but his minutes haven't been great. Brereton Diaz has the fixture this week, and the fixtures longer term aren't awful, but the data's been pretty poor. Tyler Dibbling deserves a discussion. 4.5 million. Got his first start, obviously, in Game Week 4. Will he continue to start? Probably. I don't know that he'll continue to start enough games to justify it as a pick ahead of some of the others, but he is the only £4.5 million midfielder that I probably think is an okay shout. Let's finish with Sharda. So Sharda will be very popular this week because of Wissa's injury, and by all accounts, it looks very likely that Sharda will be his replacement. People are asking about Carvalho of Brentford. He might get more minutes, potentially, but he won't be the replacement for Wissa. The replacement for Wissa is probably going to be Sharda, and it may even be that Sharda switches out to become like the out-and-out number 9. He can do that for Brentford. So let's see. from what we've seen from him in the past in the Premier, he's a good footballer, but I haven't seen enough. Like, he's only played 52 minutes per game this season. The data wasn't particularly good in those minutes. So let's see how he gets on when he gets more minutes. But as of right now, he's definitely tempting me. And if he does look like he's going to be the starting asset in Wissa's absence, on a Game Week 6 or Game Week 7 wildcard, Shard is going to be extremely popular at 5.4 million. So there we go. I could jump into it in a little bit more detail, but I think this is maybe an even more important discussion for Game Week 6 and 7. In terms of who I would go for then if you were looking at that cheaper price, I still think Semenyo is the standout to me, but you do need to accept that if you go this week, it's not a great fixture, and then they've not got a great fixture in Game Week 8, and then beyond that, the fixtures aren't even that brilliant. It's mainly 6 and 7 you'd want him for. So if you're not going to have him in 6, the window to own him really starts to obviously tighten after that. So for me, if you want Semenyo, it's got to be either now or in Game Week 6. If not Semenyo, I mean, I'm really not overly happy. I'm still okay owning Rodgers just because of his price and the fixtures and the minutes. And then maybe take a punt on a Dwight McNeil if you like the creativity. Maybe you honestly, I'm struggling. Like this is not a great looking list, but you've got the data in front of you. Obviously, check out Fantasy Football Hub if you want to look as well. Probably is Semenyo for me if you're looking at that price. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 5 preview done and dusted. If you did enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. I do really appreciate it. Also, if you're still watching at this point and you do enjoy my long form content, I uploaded an episode of FPL Therapy yesterday for Game Week 5 where I talk for an hour and a half about FPL. And if that does sound interesting, just search for FPL Therapy on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. There is 90 minutes of my unfiltered thoughts around FPL. And there was also a bit of a chat about mental health as well. So feel free to check that out. But until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.